Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order. Remind everybody, if you are on this call, please go to the agenda and click the link for the sign-in sheet to record your attendance at the meeting. There's typically too many of us on the phone to do a traditional roll call, so please use that sign-in sheet. Do we have any old business that we need to address? Do we want to go over our spreadsheet under old business and see if there's any updates or anything we need to take action on with those action items?
I think that's probably a good idea.
Great.
All right, so Daryl's got the spreadsheet up, and I'm just going to go through the items, and if you've got updates, I'll call some of the items out, but we'll start with Montrose. And Matt, I'm not sure if you're on or not, but
yep.
Wes was going to follow up with you. I think on the last item that we saw, your dates did get moved. Are you satisfied with this? Can we close it out?
Yeah, we have and Maddie can confirm, we have a confirmed date of November 10th.
Of 2020, is that correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this item out. Thank you. And then the next item we had on here had to do with Aurora's equipment. And there was a concern about the equipment not being received, and then also test dates. So Wes indicated at our last big meeting that he was going to expedite the ordering. So is Scott or Rob on?
Hey Kim, this is Scott. I am here, but I haven't been able to see the latest update. And let me look real quick because CenturyLink emailed us yesterday, but I didn't have time to read it. So if you want, you can go. Well, actually, right here. Nope, that's about installers. No, the update they sent yesterday all had to do with timeline, but nothing to do with equipment.
Okay, and the other item that's somewhat embedded in this had to do with Entrado needing test dates and IPs so they can proceed with testing. So not only just the physical hardware, but we also had some questions about those IPs. Have you gotten what you needed in that area from CenturyLink?
I believe so, but I apologize, Kim. I would have to double check with Rob to be sure. They did give us what they gave yesterday. Finally, were the concrete dates of installation and circuit test and turn up, migration testing, and then, pre-migration testing, and then an ongoing period of testing, and then the final cutover on the 7th. So I believe they have provided that information over because they did also line up the resources with Entrado to complete that work.
Okay, so you'll follow up with Rob about the IPs to see if anything else is outstanding in his opinion?
Yes, I will.
Okay, and then the other one had to do, or the next item, is a question that Bretza raised, and I don't know if Patty is on the call.
Kimberly, I'm on.
Okay, wonderful. So the next two items, Patty, they provided some responses, and the first one had to do with path diversity, and specifically Tim Goodwin said he was going to follow up with Joe and hopefully you to discuss this further. So their response here was very high-level basic. Do you know if they followed up with Joe at all, or have they reached out to you to talk about this further?
Yeah, we had a phone call last Friday. I don't know that I would say it was very productive, but we got our answers. Not that they were satisfactory, but we got them. One was the topic of the last mile, and then the other one was the path diversity. And I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to, and this is really nothing new, because it was discussed during the tariff, is it came down to, because we have fiber in our last mile, and CenturyLink is choosing to use copper. That was a choice they made because basically it's the lowest common denominator, or what they're calling level set, so that all of the PSAPs in the state would be all equitable for everybody. One interesting comment that was made is that they chose copper because they really saw no advantage to fiber, which was a whole nother discussion in itself. But it came down to cost for them, the ease of programming and deployment for CenturyLink. Quite frankly, I don't know that they had the sophistication to do some of the things that we were suggesting that wouldn't have taken much. And the other piece was that what they're putting in is NextGen will not exceed 3 meg throughout the state for everybody, and they don't see that changing anytime soon. Even though we had an option to, and I'm not quite sure what channelizing the fiber is, but it would have been a way that we could have used the existing fiber and not gone backwards to copper, which for us has been dormant for 5 years and needs to be tested. Anyway, there's still some things that they need to do for us in terms of testing, and we still haven't had any, especially testing with the SIP, like, what happens when our SIP sessions are saturated, and there were some other questions that we had. So these two can probably come off. I don't see it changing, even though there are many of us throughout the state that do have that ability to use the fiber instead of the copper.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by their answer, Patty, and I can't, nor can you or other people that were involved in the settlement meetings go into some more of the details through the tariff process, but CenturyLink made it pretty clear in the filing that we get what we get. We're not going to get additional diversity, and the network is the network that they're installing, so not a lot of room for negotiation. But I do appreciate you guys having that additional phone call with them and pushing and seeing if there's any wiggle room whatsoever on using what you already have in place and that you're currently using. So thank you for having that call.
I actually think there is, but I think they were unwilling to go there.
No, I think the technology exists, but I agree they're unwilling. It's not that they can't because of the infrastructure. It's the lack of them wanting to or being willing to. So, yeah. Okay, so for the items that you still have left for your cut, did you guys decide to request a move of your cut, or are you staying with your dates?
We're staying with our dates. Although as we get through some of the holidays here, it's certainly going to get close because we haven't seen a test plan or done any testing, so I guess we'll see.
Okay. And Patty, since I've got you off mute, I'm going to scroll down to items 69 and 70. So Daryl, if you can scroll down on your sheet. The no schedule or time frame, none of the modules. The piece that you had about this item that was added on here was, I think, what you talked to them a little bit about with the testing. Did you guys talk about that on your call as well?
It was mentioned, but what I think is we were told that everything's been ordered. So I don't know what else we need to do besides ask the question.
Okay. And then router diversity, were you going to talk to them and pursue router diversity and ask a question about how that works in the deployment for the ESInet? And did you guys get a chance to talk through that?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm trying to remember what we had talked about. I think that's some of the testing that we're still going to have to take place in terms of testing, like
Subsessions.
yeah, and where they go and who's notified and what happens when there's an overflow and all those kinds of questions.
So since Scott's going first, we'll just let him be the guinea pig and answer this for all of us. Thanks, Scott.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so we'll go back up to item 43 and then all the way down to item 68 are all great questions and points that Pueblo raised that we put on the spreadsheet. And then CenturyLink did reply with answers over on the right column. So do we have folks on from Pueblo? Okay, so I think what I'll do, Bruce, if you agree, is I'll just reach out to the Pueblo contacts and tell them we're going to close these items out based on CenturyLink's response unless there's additional questions they need follow-up on.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable.
Okay, then for the group, does anybody have additional action items that they're needing us to track down and get answers to that you want to see documented and included on here? All right, as you think of them, don't hesitate to add them yourself or just email me and I will get them added on there and then shipped over to CenturyLink so they can provide us answers in a timely manner and specifically for our call next week.
Perfect. Thank you, Kimberly. So it looks like this is going to be a pretty short meeting if there's no additional items to add to the list. So I think we just move on to open discussion. Anything anybody needs to bring up on this call?
Hey, Bruce, this is Scott. I have one thing I just wanted to bring up for the good of the group. Daryl has done a fantastic job of updating everybody over and over and over again about the grant process. And I just wanted to let you guys know, of course, since we were going first, we had to be the first one on that piece also. And publicly apologize to Daryl because he had to track me down like 3 different times through the process. But thank you so much, Daryl, for doing it. The documentation that they first passed that they ask you for is really not onerous. I think within a half hour you could probably pull it together and give it to them. That's not a big deal. The grant contract that the state sends, just as a heads up for everybody, because everybody's business and government approaches it a little bit differently, does require signatures from the appropriate authority within your organization. I know that sounds basic, but in my case, it actually had to go all the way to city management, and that put us a little bit at risk of meeting the timeline needed for the grant. So just to reiterate what Daryl has said numerous times, when you guys get those documents, please just, if you can, even just give a heads up and find out in advance who in your organization has that signing authority, and just tee them up so that they're aware it's coming, because we really did get down to the wire on having ours completed in time.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah,
that's good info.
Go ahead, Daryl.
And just so everyone knows, I've gotten some feedback on that grant agreement in that when it was put together, I was told that the language in it was not really negotiable, that it's a standard contract that the state uses. The one thing I was able to do was to get the insurance requirements out of it since they weren't really applicable. There's still a lot of language in there that is not really applicable to what we're doing with this grant program, and that's caused some heartburn for some of the early 911 authorities that are transitioning. And I'll tell you what I've now been told is that the language is negotiable in that you can provide suggested changes by giving us a red line of the grant. However, that then has to go back through the approval process through the state controller's office, the attorney general's office, and DORA's executive leadership. So if you are one of the first ones that are transitioning, I would really encourage you to not stumble too much over things that aren't applicable anyway. But if you do have changes, especially if you're one of the later ones that want to do that, you can provide me with red lines of that grant agreement, and I can send it through the through the approval process. But if you're transitioning in January or February, I would really encourage you to try to not stumble too much over those things that are not applicable anyway, simply because of the time frame that we're working with. And I want to make sure that everybody gets their reimbursements.
Yeah, that's going to be the big thing is if any work is done before that's signed, then that's not eligible for the reimbursement, correct?
Well, we've had some discussions about that as well. The hard line is no work that's done before that grant agreement is signed and it is in place is eligible for reimbursement. If it comes down to it, I think I can make the argument that the work that's being done is you getting the invoice and giving it to us, not any of the project management work that goes on before the invoice is provided. But I would rather not have to test that if I don't have to by everybody getting their grant agreements in place before before the major work is done.
The contract is pretty daunting. I was talking to my attorney about it Friday. I think Boulder was talking about trying to do some red lines and maybe negotiate it for the whole state. I'm not sure if that's still a consideration. Patty, do you know?
Well, we pretty much worked something out with Daryl and signed off on it.
Okay. The discussion between Ryan and I last Friday was that there's a whole lot of stuff in there that is not applicable and really shouldn't be there, but the risk is very low to just moving forward with that current contract. So I'm just waiting for the final word from Ryan to make sure that I'm good to sign it, but I think we're going to consider it a low risk issue that we probably don't need to push back on too hard.
And Daryl,
Bruce,
this is Jeff.
Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Daryl, could you just kind of reiterate what is reimbursable, just in a nutshell, for all of us?
So what's reimbursable in this first round is just the tariffed non-recurring charges and the tariffed project management fee. That's it.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
If there is still funding available after everyone, when we get close to the end of this project, I'm going to see if we can do another round and take submissions for reimbursement for the other incidental costs that you're having, such as the electrical work. If you're having to put in additional rack space, that sort of thing. We'll see if that's reimbursed. We can make that reimbursable too, and I'll have to make an argument to our people internally that should be allowed, even though it's work that's already been done. Really, otherwise we're leaving federal grant money on the table, which I don't want to do if we can avoid.
What about SIP licensing?
I'll consider that when we get closer to it. I think an argument could be made for that, and it certainly would fall under the use of the grant. I think part of it's going to depend on how much money we're going to have left over and whether there'd be enough to consider that as well.
Great, thanks.
And keeping in mind that those non-recurring costs for the first 6 months is your service for 6 months, essentially rolled into a one-time payment at the very beginning. So
right.
It's for depending on, well, I guess for any authority, it's a significant amount of money. Right.
And Bruce, this is Scott. The only thing I wanted to add, I know everybody's attorney is a little bit different, but when I explained the urgency and just had a conversation with our city attorney and our city manager both about it, the fact that it was a grant being reimbursed by DORA and it was like government to government, they, like you said, they didn't have any burning heartache really over the terms of the contract after that.
Perfect. I suspect most people will come to that conclusion, especially if they're early on in the deployment.
For those of us that might be later migrators and don't have that time crunch, if folks in this group do end up having changes made, can we share those amongst ourselves and perhaps save ourselves doing it unnecessarily over and over?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, there's no NDA in it or anything, so you can share it with whoever you want.
Matt, is that something we want to try to put a working document together on and just have it on the web page for this committee, and that way everybody would have access to that?
I think that'd be fantastic, because there's no sense in METSA arguing 6 months from now over language that's already been accepted by DORA in someone else's revisions. So yeah, that'd be fantastic.
So what I'll do is I'll put a folder on the webpage that has the current draft grant agreement, and if anybody does submit any changes that end up getting accepted by the state, I'll put those up there as well.
Perfect. That's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Anybody have any other questions on the grant process? Don't leave money on the table. Okay, any other items for discussion? Kimberly, have you? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to circle back to those PSAPs that are cutting in January and just make sure that there isn't anything else that they want to talk about for the group that they've learned or concerns.
Kim, I don't have anything from the Aurora side to add at this point, but I'm going to see Rob this afternoon, and if there's any other things that we think would be beneficial to the group, I'll make sure I email you out of band so that we can update it before next week.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And this is Patty. We have a call with CenturyLink tomorrow to talk about call routing options with Viper and CPE. So that's just kind of still outstanding with a couple other questions we have.
Patty, are you talking about like when your sessions are all saturated, the routing options within Viper, or what do you mean exactly?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Because one of the things we know is that CenturyLink is not regulating any of the SIP count. So there's just some questions on that hopefully will get answered tomorrow.
Okay.
Can you expand what you mean by they're not regulating the SIP count?
Well, that's what we were told. So one of the questions is, what happens when the allotted SIP sessions are saturated?
Mm-hmm.
And we were told that they don't regulate the SIP count. So our question tomorrow is, so then what happens? Are we notified, and what happens to that overflow?
Right, because it should go at the selective router if you have 10 concurrent SIP sessions and that 11th 911 call comes in, it should go to your backup, who you've identified as your backup PSAP.
And I believe that's actually in the tariff that's provided. Right. So I think there's probably a misunderstanding on their part as to what your question is.
Yeah, there's supposed to be a web GUI by which the PSAP or the authority's designee, as stated in the tariff, can go in and adjust and set up quasi-dynamic routing for overflow, multiple PSAPs, different times of day, other conditions.
Right, lots more options than we currently have, is my understanding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I do wonder if they just don't know what you're asking, Patty.
I think they do, but we'll at least Entrada will be on the call tomorrow too. So.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and add this to our spreadsheet because I think it's a great point, and it would be great for what you learned, Patty, to also share with the group and have CenturyLink talk to it a little bit next week. So I'll add that to our spreadsheet.
Hey, and Kim, this is Scott. So agreed, like the answer that they give Patty and them would definitely, is from a functional perspective, definitely what we need to know regardless. But just curious, not that we need to belabor it right now, but is the group talked about maybe in the future talking about alternate routing agreements? Meaning, for example, today, unfortunately, poor Bruce's group is our default route from Aurora. If we get filled out, we just bury them. And so we've just put it on the back burner, knowing that once we went to the ESInet, we would probably start talking with other entities about maybe it would make sense to split that load out and stuff. So not that it needs to be drug out right now, but maybe as more people migrate over, we could have a better, more informed discussion of what those capabilities are and maybe going back to having a standardized agreement that we all just enter. If we are going to partner with each other, we could all use the same boilerplate agreement to do that. I don't know if anybody else did.
Well, no, Scott, I think that's great, and I think our question right now is just understanding how overflow works at the router when our SIP sessions are full. But I think an action item that we definitely need to track for this group is getting creative and getting out of the box. And if we have this GUI that we can do dynamic routing on the fly, or we are able to break things and have some routing defined in there to say, hey, I'm going to send this half of my flow here, half my flow there, especially if it comes in on this part of my jurisdiction. I think that's definitely what this user group future is for past deployment. That's
Exactly,
great.
yeah.
Maybe it'd be a good idea to ask CenturyLink to present on that shortly at the full meeting next week as to what the routing options are and how that's adjusted at the local level.
Yeah, I think that's great, Daryl. I captured that in the spreadsheet, and I'll send that over to Wes and make sure that they can talk about it next week.
Cool.
Matt, are you there? This is Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm just trying to get my head around this. Are we talking in Apple and Orange when we talk SIP sessions internally versus concurrent workstation sessions for CenturyLink? In other words, the SIP is a function of your licensing and what you can handle, in essence, internally. And then the number of calls that can flow in or out are limited by the concurrent session licensing that CenturyLink's giving us. Am I grasping that, or?
I think so. I would just reiterate it a different way, I guess, just as a way of confirmation. So your concurrent sessions are SIP sessions. The SIP is just the mode of communication.
Right. I think that's what CenturyLink says they're regulating, is those concurrent sessions are in the tariff.
And so you order X number of SIP sessions, which would be the equivalent of 911 lines or 911 trunks.
Right.
But then, yeah, your licensing for your CPE is a separate animal.
Yeah, maybe that's what they're talking about, Patty, is, I don't know.
So the
Since
licensing.
we haven't had much.
Sorry, Patty, go
We
ahead.
haven't had much. We just haven't much communication with Intrado, so that very well could be. So hopefully tomorrow we get that.
Yeah, so everyone will need to talk to their vendor in terms of software and licensing for it for the SIP handling, and if there's a SIP session qualification on your licensing account qualification.
All right. Anything else that anybody needs to bring up to let us get with CenturyLink so they have time to prepare? That's the whole point of this meeting, is to put things down and then they can be prepared with answers or a demo or something to that effect a week later. All right. Hearing nothing, I think we are ready to adjourn a half an hour early.
Thanks, everybody.
Take it.
Everybody have a good week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, all.